Most fall drivers and campers these days can see the obvious benefit of adding a second battery to their setup, and many people would already have one installed in their vehicle or trailer. So the next logical step then is to add a third battery. So in today's video, I'm going to run through the reasons why a third battery makes so much sense, how to make the most of that extra capacity, as well as run through some different layouts for different purposes. So first up, why would you want a third battery? Well, there are a couple of situations where a third battery makes a whole lot of sense, even more than the obvious benefit of extra power and capacity. Number one is if you want to run two batteries under the bonnet and one in the rear of your vehicle to run your 12-volt accessories like your fridge and camping gear. Adding a second battery under the bonnet, particularly a starting type battery, means that your winch, all your driving lights and any other power-hungry 12-volt accessories have plenty of power on tap. You've doubled your cranking amps, which is ideal in colder climates, and if you're doing a whole lot of low-range work with your winch and plenty of spotlights, you'll have no trouble either, because two batteries are able to supply double the current. Two is if you might need a lot more power in the rear of your vehicle to run things like fridges, inverters, more camp lights, and even medical equipment. By adding a second battery, you're halving the discharge rate on each battery. So with one battery, if you're drawing 5 amps, you're now drawing 2.5 amps on each battery. That slows down the discharge rate, which will increase the battery's overall life, and it will increase the capacity per cycle. So what is a 100 amp hour battery and what does that mean? Well, once a battery is manufactured, it's then put through a number of tests to find how many amps are required to completely discharge the battery over 20 hours. In this case, it took 5 amps every hour over 20 hours to completely discharge the battery, meaning this is a 100 amp hour battery. If it had taken 6 amps over 20 hours, it would have been a 120 amp hour battery. What's interesting about those results is if you change the current, you don't stick with the 100 amp hour figure. So if you increase the discharge current, you'll decrease the overall battery capacity. If you decrease the current, you'll actually increase the battery capacity. So if you had a single 100 amp hour battery and you were drawing about 5 amps, you'd have around 100 amp hours to play with. If on the other hand you were drawing 10 amps out of this battery, the actual capacity would drop to around 90 amp hours. And if on the other hand you were only drawing 2.5 amps, it would actually increase to about 113 amp hours. So if you were using 5 amps, then shared it across 2 batteries, each battery is only dealing with 2.5 amps, which means each battery is theoretically able to put out about 113 amp hours. Now this is a lot to take in, so I've actually put together a PDF that I'll throw in the description so you can get your head around this a little bit more if you're interested. The third setup is if you have a trailer. You'll have your starter battery under the bonnet, a deep cycle battery in the back of the vehicle, and a second deep cycle battery in the trailer itself. With this setup, not only can you run accessories in your vehicle, but you can also run them in your trailer. So it's perfect if you're planning to use your trailer as a base camp. It means that if you go out for a day trip, you can still run your fridge in the vehicle, stop for a couple of hours, have lunch, have a couple of cold drinks, and you won't kill your starter battery. And the same thing can be said back at camp. If you're running a freezer or fridge back there too, you can rely on that battery to keep it cold. All these setups require very different wiring. So let's jump back to our first setup. With this setup, you could basically wire your 2 starter batteries together up front with some heavy duty fuses in between so they act like a single large battery. That means double the cold cranking amps for easier starting, more power on demand when you're winching, and more power for all your driving lights. Though it would also require a DC-DC charger or smart isolator to charge and disconnect your deep cycle battery in the back. If you've got a standard alternator and you're running the same battery chemistry under the bonnet as you are in the back of your vehicle, you could get away with a smart battery isolator. But if you're running an AGM, you have a smart alternator, or you just want the absolute best charging setup, you'll need a DC-DC charger. On to setup 2, which is probably the most common. Under the bonnet, you've got your starter battery, and then you've got a pair of deep cycle batteries in the rear of your vehicle. So depending on whether you've got a smart alternator or you're running different battery chemistries will determine whether you need a smart battery isolator or a DC-DC charger. And then the next thing to be aware of is your wiring. You've got to make sure that you wire your positive to the positive and negative to the negative of both batteries, and then all power in and out needs to come from the positive of one battery and the negative of the other. That'll mean it'll be treated like one big battery, so it's charged and discharged equally. And finally, onto the third setup, which is if you're running a trailer. Now you're gonna need a DC-DC charger or smart battery isolator to run the battery in the back of your vehicle, depending on its chemistry and your alternator type. Plus, you'll need a DC-DC charger in the trailer to make sure you're charging your third battery correctly. If you're running your trailer as a base camp, a DC-DC charger with solar input is a good idea, as it means you can keep your battery charging all day in the sun. To connect and disconnect your trailer, you'll need a quick connect plug on the drawbar, which means you can join it up so while you're driving it's getting a good charge, and then disconnect it when you want to run it as a separate system. Finally, make sure you use heavy gauge wire running all the way from your alternator or starter battery to the back of your vehicle, so that when you plug your trailer in, the DC-DC charger is getting a good amount of power. Don't try and daisy chain your trailer's DC-DC charger off the battery in the back of your vehicle. And it's even worse to try and run the one DC-DC charger in the back of your vehicle for both the vehicle battery and your trailer battery. The system will lose efficiency due to voltage drop, not to mention the temperature of your two batteries will be very different, so the DC-DC charger won't be outputting the correct voltage for the battery in your trailer. For all three of these setups, it's important to ensure that your alternator is up to the task. Any triple battery setup is going to require a fair bit of power output, so have a think about how much power you're using while you're driving and think about upgrading your alternator. Or if you're using a lot of power while you're at camp, think about adding more solar to ensure you're covered. Now this will really come down to your camping and full driving style. If you tend to sit at camp for a couple of days or a week at a time, there's no point upgrading your alternator. And conversely, if you're the sort of person who'll get up early, do a full day of driving and turn up somewhere else late in the arvo, extra solar isn't going to help you too much. The one exception to the rule is adding permanent solar to your setup along with a DC-DC charger with solar priority charging. That means you could have up to 25 amps of solar power charging your second battery, leaving your alternator to charge your starter battery without stressing it. Now you might be thinking, why wouldn't I get one big deep cycle battery instead of the two smaller ones? Well, there are pros and cons to each option. First, in the case of two batteries, you can spread that weight out and keep it down low for a lower center of gravity. A larger battery may not fit beside your drawers or under your tray and could put somewhere near 50 or 60 kilos in the one particular point of your four-wheel drive or trailer. Two smaller batteries are also more portable. You could put one in a battery box and use it as a portable power hub if you needed to, or even transfer it from your trailer to your vehicle and back again, depending on the trip you're going on. The next is that if something does go wrong with one of your batteries, you always have a backup. With a single large battery, if something goes wrong, that's it. But with smaller batteries, you can disconnect one and carry on using the other. Although you've lost half your capacity, you haven't lost it all. On the other hand, two batteries require slightly more wiring and could cost slightly more to set up, but that really depends on your setup, budget, and requirements. All three of these layouts could be applied to your setup to fully upgrade your vehicle from front to back. You could run twin starter batteries under the bonnet, twin deep cycles in the back of your vehicle, and twin deep cycles in your trailer, for example. As I said earlier, you'll need to make sure that your alternator is up to the task if you're upgrading your setup to something like this. Another great idea is to add extra solar to your setup so it'll charge your batteries while at camp. And the best of both worlds is adding permanent solar and a DC-DC charger with solar priority charging to take some load off your alternator. Follow the basics and a triple battery setup can work for any camping or full driving trip without breaking the bank. As always, look after your 12-volt system and it will look after you. So go for a drive and let your DC-DC charger properly charge your auxiliary batteries. When you're at camp, make sure you plug in your solar to keep them topped up, and if you ever need to, use a good quality 240-volt charger at home to keep everything happy. As always, make sure you're using fuses and circuit breakers the right wire gauge, and good quality joints and connections. Thanks for watching. If you've got any questions, make sure you throw them in the comments below, and then take a minute to check out the rest of the channel for more 12-volt tips and tricks. Plus, there's plenty of fall driving, camping, and camp cooking videos to help you get prepared for your next trip. Cheers.